at this, this is the part of the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, that we're going to spend almost all of our time talking about the rest of the term, because this is the system that, along with the endocrine system, helps us maintain homeostasis. I mean, the most important thing for us to do is to be able to, in a healthy physiological setting, is to keep our body within limits that are optimal for whatever physiological process we're talking about. So if it's cardiovascular physiology, if it's digestive physiology, urinary physiology, respiratory, lymphatic, whatever, for those systems to function optimally, they have to, all of these different parameters have to be kind of intact. And that's homeostasis. And you don't consciously think of those things, right? You're not consciously thinking about regulating blood pressure and things like that. So if you remember when we looked at the kind of overall organization of the central nervous system, we had the kind of efferent kind of motor pathway, right? And this came from this efferent motor pathway. Came from the CNS. So in the CNS, brain and the spinal cord, we're doing all of those synaptic transmissions like we talked about before, using CNS neurotransmitters to integrate and interpret information. And we're trying to figure out, so to speak, are we within certain limits, right? Or are we out of those limits? And we know we had a sensory afferent pathway that carried this information toward the CNS. And that came because we had receptors, right, that could perceive a particular stimulus. And the question that the CNS is figuring out, is this stimulus worth worrying about? We saw that sometimes very weak stimuli never even make it to the CNS, right? If they're not strong enough to generate a threshold potential in a sensory neuron, you're never going to get it to the CNS. But if it is strong enough to worry about, we do send an action potential here along a sensory neuron that should create action potentials in every neuron in the pathway of the CNS, and there should be an action potential that exits the CNS via an axon of this efferent motor pathway. And where is this going? This is going, right, to some kind of effector, and that effector is going to give you a response. So when we talk about what's happening out here, which is what I want to talk about here in a couple minutes, this is a neuroeffector synapse here, right? So it's not between a neuron and a neuron, which is all of this stuff. It's a neuroeffector synapse. Now, we mentioned, and you're probably aware, that there are two different branches, I guess we could think about, or whatever, or parts of this efferent motor pathway. There is the somatic motor output. So soma means body, it goes to the body, and in particular what it goes to the effectors, which are skeletal muscles. And the response is that these cellular skeletal muscles contract and the body moves, right? I guess we should say the skeleton moves. Most of these are attached to the skeleton. Some skeletal muscles are attached to skin for facial expression and things like that, but for the most part they're attached to bones, and bones move. Okay? And this one is voluntary. You have conscious control over this. Meaning that you could start that pathway from a stimulus, or you could start that pathway from the CNS. That's what we mean when we say something's voluntary. It doesn't have to be elicited by a stimulus. The CNS can generate a signal independently to the somatic motor output and cause those muscles to contract. Is that okay? And that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about here. But there's also autonomic, I'm not going to say motor, I'll just say autonomic output. And this is via what we would say the ANS, right? Or the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system controls other effectors, namely smooth muscle. Where do you find smooth muscle?
Esophagus?
Yes. Yes.
Colon?
What's that? In the wall of any hollow organ, which is what she just said, sort of, right? Yeah? Walls of hollow organs except the heart. Anything that's hollow in the body has smooth muscle in the wall. Okay. And we do that. And what does smooth muscle do? It contracts, right, in response. And what that causes is that causes movement, I guess we should say, within whatever the organ is that it's in, right? If this is an artery, it's going to affect movement of blood in the artery and affect blood pressure. If this is lining the digestive tract, it's going to affect the movement of things within that digestive tract. Cardiac muscle. And of course, cardiac muscle is going to contract, and that's going to generate blood pressure, and that contracts. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, cardiovascular physiology. It'll be a lot of fun. Well, fun for me. I don't care what you think. And then lots of glands. And these glands, when they're stimulated, they secrete. Now, what's interesting is that there are, or there should be, and there should be, right, opposing branches, if you will, of this autonomic output. There is what we call the sympathetic branch, right? And then what's the other one?
Parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic. Now, these are antagonistic. You know what that means, right? That means that they work opposite of each other. Okay. So these are antagonistic. So, because things are, when things are antagonistic, they never should occur simultaneously, right? You should never have a parasympathetic and a sympathetic response on the same target at the same time, because they would cancel each other out. For the most part, this is a generalization and there are exceptions. The sympathetic is excitatory and the parasympathetic is inhibitory.